Next up is Voices of Change with your hosts, Leslie Acosta and Aissia Richardson. Voices of Change is to connect, inform, and empower people to engage in social political change. Right here on USALA Radio. World news, local politics, saving money and investing, all this and more right here on USALA Radio. Your voice, your radio.
Hello, everyone. You are listening to Voices of Change on USALA Radio with your hosts, Leslie Acosta and Aissia Richardson. Today, we're going to talk about gun violence here in the city of Philadelphia and across the board and across this nation. We all know that gun violence now is considered to be a public health issue. Many Americans would have a different opinion and answer to this question. The truth is, the numbers do not lie. It is a complicated issue that brings a lot of passion on both sides of the aisle. There are also political matters and bills that have been passed that have made solving this issue very hard, not only here in Pennsylvania, but across this nation. The numbers don't lie, folks, and they do not have an agenda behind them. The facts are just facts. So here is what the majority of Americans can agree on. According to the CDC's most recent reports, there were 39,000 gun deaths in 2017 alone. We haven't even gotten to the numbers in 2018 and now 19 going into 20. In 2018, there were 426 mass shootings in which 528 people died and more than 1,500 people were injured. Today, we will discuss gun violence in Philadelphia and across this nation. And to address this issue, we have invited a special guest. He was a former director of Ceasefire PA, Jeff Dempsey, who is now running for the 175 Legislative District. Welcome, Jeff. Aissia, thank you for being here. We also have a special guest who we love to have here also on USALA Media and Radio, Prince Johnakin. Thank you and welcome. So we're going to open up the floor. Aissia, welcome. And hey, you had a nice vacation.
I did.
You look very relaxed.
It was great to get some time off to do some self-care, but then to come back to an 85% increase in gun violence from last year to this year is very, very disheartening and very, very troubling. I'm coming in and I'm going past memorials and playgrounds. The amount of young people, women that were shot last year and killed. We are I think at about 32, and we haven't even finished the month of January. So it's a very disheartening. But I am. There is hope in that the focused deterrent programs that were put in place in South Philadelphia did show some reductions in gun violence, particularly in South Philadelphia, and now that focused deterrent program is going to West Philadelphia. So I am heartened to see that the city is putting resources and the state is putting resources into this issue, but we have a population that is between the ages of 16 and 16 and 34 who have been disengaged in education and in job opportunities. So this is a situation where everybody needs to be all in on this issue. And I'm so glad that somebody who is an expert in this issue is in the room, and maybe you could pick up the mantle around looking at ways that we can create policy, programs, and create funding opportunities to address this very horrible issue.
And it's crazy. Let me just say this. Here's the challenge. No American city can better optimize, I would say, the epidemic of youth violence in Philadelphia and also nationally, Jeff. And homicide represents the second leading cause of death amongst or individuals between the ages of 15 and 19 in Philadelphia. This is unbelievable, and I'm glad that we have someone running for state rep
Yeah.
that at least comes from a background and from a position of experience, because you have been dealing with this. I met you in Harrisburg fighting this issue, fighting legislation, fighting policy to ensure that we can effectuate change on the policy level. Running now for state rep, you have certain priorities that you're running on. What would be your number one priority if you get elected as state rep to address some of this issue, especially what's going on here in the city of Philadelphia? What say you about this?
Yeah, I mean, I think in Harrisburg, we like to pretend that this is some sort of abstract debate, that this is a philosophical difference, or, you know, we can agree to disagree, and we lose sight of the fact that every day that we fail to do anything about this issue, we lose people. You know, the death toll and the body count rises on this. And let's not be mistaken. The Commonwealth of Pennsylvania has a gun violence problem. Mm-hmm. That's everywhere. Mm-hmm. You know, it looks different in different places, but it's everywhere. So in the city of Philadelphia, yeah, it's young black men. But when we get out into the middle part of the state, it's middle-aged white men who use guns in the home to take their own lives.
Mm-hmm. Right.
You know, we know that suicides account for 2/3 of gun deaths in this country. And, you know, when we get into different parts of the state, it's intimate partners who are gunned down by someone that they love. We lose about 53 intimate partners a year to guns. Guns still remain the number one cause of death in intimate partner death. So throughout all of the Commonwealth, we have a gun violence problem. And, you know, I'm running for office to address many issues. There are many things that I'm passionate about. But we have to do something about our gun violence problem, because when we fail to address it in any way, then we're not going to see any sort of results. We're not going to see the tide turn in any direction. And, you know, I'm under no delusion. Some of these are harder to tackle. When we talk about, you know, Philadelphia's homicide problem, yeah, access to guns is a component of that. But also, you know, it stems from issues that we have to address that are much more complicated to untangle, like decades of unfair housing policy, decades of a substandard education system that sees children from certain zip codes do better than others, lack of employment opportunities, right? So, you know, there's a lot of work to do. You know, I say that I don't want to go to Harrisburg to talk about what I'm going to do in the first 100 days in office. I want to talk about the first 100 bills to address this issue.
Right.
And see, and this is your fundamental problem right here. You didn't buy your way into this problem. You're not going to buy your way out of this problem. If you look at the economics over the past decade, you spent billions of dollars redeveloping and rehabbing those neighborhoods that you're saying that they're housing problems. The Housing Authority alone spent over close to $1 billion in its rehab and some of its urban places and urban developments and stuff like that. What you need to do is put the problem where it lies. The illegal guns that are used inside of the city of Philadelphia and are transported, and places where they sell these guns to folks on the streets in these urban neighborhoods. I've not heard one person say there's a house on 13th Street that sells guns. I've not heard one identity that identified that you got houses in the Northeast that sell guns, which are a problem for those guns, a problem for the residents of the city of Philadelphia if those guns are on the street and they're used in the way that they have been used to create. Last year, 353 deaths, murders. 90% of those shootings were by illegal guns, and that makes a legal person, law-abiding citizen, go out and say, "I need a gun to protect myself," because you've not stopped the illegal guns that are on the streets.
How do we do that?
But let's be clear. There's definitely policies to address this, right? I mean, Philadelphia is in this weird stalemate with regards to mandatory reporting of lost or stolen firearms. Right. This policy is believed to really impact this issue of legal guns. And also, let's not be mistaken, this issue is much more complicated than legal guns.
It is.
Or rather, illegal guns. First of all,
illegal guns.
Yeah, that phrase isn't accurate. An illegal gun would be like an Uzi or a turret. That's an illegal gun. I think what you mean is a prohibited purchaser, someone who shouldn't have access to a firearm or having it. But let me just make one point, Ro. The Las Vegas shooter violated no laws as they were amassing hundreds of guns, thousands of rounds of ammunition, transporting those firearms over state line. The first law that they broke was breaking the hotel room window. The second law that they broke was committing the largest mass shooting in modern American history.
Wait,
so here's the thing: is when we start talking about illegal guns, what we lose sight of the fact is, yes, sometimes the issue is access to firearms. sometimes the issue is whether or not people who are in the business of selling guns
Yeah.
are
They don't
there
do
any
their due diligence
is there
also.
any mechanism in place to
Actually,
hold these people accountable?
The police are actually looking at this issue of gentrification because what's been happening is that folks are being pushed out of their neighborhoods and they're getting into beefs with other people in their neighborhoods. So Philadelphia doesn't have gangs, and so the interruption model that Philly ceasefire is based on with the gang, intervention, it doesn't work here in Philly because we don't have gangs, but we have displacement. So what the police have been noticing and documenting, is well documented, is that gentrification and people moving from North Philly to Southwest, from Southwest to North Philly because they cannot find affordable housing is causing this increase in gun violence, as well as the population demographics.
Okay.
We have a larger population of young people who are disengaged from the educational system. These are documented, noted facts that have been looked at by everyone across the city.
We do have a housing crisis. Is that attached to gun violence?
It is.
Well,
Which is why $2 million was just put into PHDC, the Philadelphia Housing Development Corporation, to help people pay for their rent. So there's a new program where there's $300 a month that's going to be put towards people being able to afford their rent so that they can be in their neighborhoods.
When a person is arrested on the street, the terminology that a cop uses to charge them with is unlawfully possession of an illegal handgun. So illegal doesn't necessarily mean the dynamics of the gun you use. Illegal is someone who has a gun who's not permitted to have that gun. And if you look at it, the last 20 years in the city of Philadelphia, the majority group of people that were displaced were people in public housing that you uprooted under the tax credits. Developers came in and they uprooted these people out of South Philly, out of North Philly, out of Abbotsford, out of Schuylkill Falls, and displaced them. So when you take a person who lives in PHA and Schuylkill Falls and you move them down on Diamond Street, and you may say there's no gangs, but there's territorial turfs down there.
Yeah, that's
okay?
right. That's
and
right.
so it's not like the city has been displacing people. You guys, not you guys. The city has captured its developers have captured some areas that they want to develop in, and they use the housing authority to relocate its residents. And that's what you're having when folks have to go somewhere else and protect themselves. Matter of fact, there was 3 people from our development who went down Diamond Street, and their brothers was in one of those turf wars and had gotten shot and killed.
Yeah.
And so we have to find a better way. And I think it's jobs. I think it's economics. I think before we start saying it's the displacement, because you're not displacing everybody. You know how many new folks that moved into the Jefferson University area, East Falls, Roxborough area, that hadn't lived there in 10 years, and they come in that development and they created RCOs, and now they're a fixture in that community. And the folks who have been relocated are somewhere else still struggling and trying to survive.
Yeah. Well, I can just say this. Philadelphia has the highest poverty rate of any city in the country. Right? We know this. We know this. The other thing that many people don't know, Aissia, Wayne, Jacobs, myself, and we've addressed this, where, the population here in Philadelphia, you have well over 300,000 ex-offenders in the city of Philadelphia, which is quarter of the population in the city of Philadelphia. And a lot of these people, when they do come out of prison, they don't have a sustainable reentry programs that work for these people. Oftentimes, they can't find a job because they have they're formerly convicted. So there's a lot of issues here to address, Jeff. And I think you're in a very great position because you understand some of these issues. How you're going to go to Harrisburg and at least, not saying that you're going to promise to change things, but at least to address some of these issues that are it's a prevalent problem.
Well, and I think, just to be clear, about I wasn't trying to split hairs when it came to the semantics around the phrase illegal guns.
Right.
What I think we have to be careful of is we don't want to advocate for a system that puts more people into the criminal justice system. because they're in possession of a gun and they shouldn't be, right? Even if they're not doing anything with that firearm, because they feel as though they need it for safety or protection. Now, again, I think that that's more indicative of a failure of government. If someone feels like they need a gun in their neighborhood because they don't feel safe, that's a failure of government to make sure that that person feels safe in their community. Right. And that's a lot harder to tackle. But I always get a bit just nervous when we talk about illegal guns and we say we need to do something about illegal guns. Let's crack down on illegal guns. Because what happens when that thought plays out in everyday life is that we end up in a system that's not doing anything about the trafficker of those guns, right? The person who's using their clean record to sell maybe 3 or 4 guns at a time. We're not ending up talking about that person, but we end up talking about the person that you mentioned, the person who gets arrested for, having a firearm and they're a prohibited purchaser. So I always I want to just pause and give pause when we talk about illegal guns. I wasn't trying to, like I said, split hairs. Oh. But my concern is that I see elected officials say, we've got to crack down on the illegal guns. We need to get all the illegal guns off the street. And my concern is, hey, that's not focusing the attention where it needs to be, on the distributors of these guns. It could end up accidentally supporting a system that focuses on police arresting more individuals and, like I said, thrusting them into the criminal justice system.
But, Jeff, the most dangerous thing for a police officer in his life is somebody who has an illegal gun who takes a shot at him.
Yeah, I mean...
And so when you say that a cop may take a gun off of a person who shouldn't have a gun...
Sure.
That's very important because there's no other...
Yeah, I mean, no one's suggesting lawlessness here, right? I mean, laws have to be enforced. But what I'm saying, when we're talking about trying to solve problems, we can't just say it's the illegal guns. We really need to craft legislation like mandatory reporting of lost or stolen, which Harrisburg has not taken up.
Or straw purchases.
Right.
Which cracks down on straw purchases.
And there's also a sweet spot between over-policing and community policing, right? So there it's getting to a point where some folks in some neighborhoods, some seniors in some neighborhoods are asking for stop and frisk again. And so that to me is this issue of over policing and a lack of trust in the police. And so you know what? It's on the table.
Yeah, but we're not
It's on the
table.
No, I know, but
right.
This is getting the spike is not we are seeing an increase in the gun violence. We are seeing an increase in shootings and homicides.
And I'm telling you, we're not supporting that.
Right. That's what I'm saying, which is why we need to have this comprehensive approach. We need to have a comprehensive conversation that addresses education, that addresses access to affordable housing, that addresses, figuring out how we can get people not just jobs but careers.
That's right.
But careers, and employment at their skill level. So I think that the approach needs to be focused, but also needs to be varied.
Well, and if I could just add, I mean, I think one thing that also has to happen is, we've got to dispel some of the myths out there. So when I've been in policy conversations about mandatory reporting of lost or stolen, there is, this picture that gets painted of the gun dealer as like someone in a cigarette boat and, wearing a white suit and is overly affluent. And the reality is that someone can be in the business of selling guns and do it 2 or 3 at a time, out of their house, out of their car. And, laws like that can certainly have an impact on law enforcement's ability to find actual distributors of firearms. But again, we have to dispel some of the myths and notions we have in our own kind of public consciousness about
There's
it.
a statistic that I ran into prior to coming here, because you know how we do our homework and research, right? 40% of the children between the age of 16 and 24 have gotten their experience on how to handle a gun based on a video game. And so no one's talking about the behavior that some of these video games are inducing inside of a teenager between the age of 16 all the way until an adult 24. So if he's sitting there 23 hours out of a week playing this video game and his Grand Theft Auto or one of them other violent games, and he picks up a gun and holds it sideways or turns it this way.
But I got to throw out a flag here. I mean, video games can be incredibly violent. Some may argue too violent. That's not what I'm in the business of. But in the scenario you just laid out, the biggest thing that's concerning to me isn't that kid playing video games all day. It's how did that kid get that gun?
Right,
We
exactly.
have,
No, wait.
we have to.
Right.
Look, but we can't.
I'm on
we
that, but
can't
the
distract-
behavioral study. I'm talking about a behavioral
Right,
study
but
that
that-
shows
but
that.
But that's
that's
one
separate
step away.
argument.
That's one
No.
step away from blaming music, right?
Right.
So what happens is it's not music or video games. It's always going to come down to access.
And
And if we're not doing anything that we can on the legislative level to restrict or limit access, and I'm not talking about the law-abiding gun owner. I'm talking about the fact that there are people who shouldn't have guns, like children.
Right.
How are children getting guns?
And so we
And if someone's
know-
selling it to them, then that
Right.
person needs to be found and prosecuted.
on the
That-
streets, the guns, a lot of times the straw purchases are women.
Intimate partners. Yeah.
Intimate partners, women who don't have records are buying these guns and giving them to their partners who do. So if this issue of reporting lost and stolen guns gets out and folks know, hey, your baby mama about to go down for your gun, which means that your kids are going into the foster care system. I mean, that is, that's a carrot and a stick.
Yeah.
So let's figure out how we can get you programs, how we can get you resources so that you can take care of your family legally as opposed to using illegal means.
Yeah.
So we really need to talk to women and talk to women about making sure that they can keep that they're not jeopardizing their, putting their children's lives at risk.
And I think this conversation of, everyone needs to be at the table. Republicans, this is not a Republican or Democratic issue. This
Right.
is a human life issue, and it is a public health crisis that we're having here in the city of Philadelphia. And if we don't involve people that are in the position to effectuate change, like the Republicans are in control of the legislature, Melvin, that's a fact.
We're not giving up.
But
any
not
There-
Mike
there's a
Torzai
fact
anymore.
Well, yeah, because he's retiring.
We're not giving up
But
any grounds.
but
on
it's
this
not
issue.
it's not giving up any grounds. It's doing what is right. And if we don't sit at the table and have this real conversation on how to effectuate change, so that the kids don't have access to guns, where we can limit that access, we're never going to move this needle, or we're never going to do anything substantive when it comes to gun legislation in Pennsylvania.
There was a
the
Go ahead.
Republicans have to come to the table, and we have to negotiate common sense legislation.
There
on
was a
this.
high school student who used a gun to kill his brother. Whatever it means, or however that happened, whether it was a mistake or whatever, the gun was in the house, pointed at his brother, and he killed his brother. High school track stars. They convicted the father of the incident because the father had a criminal background, a criminal record, and he was not supposed to have a firearm. And that firearm was in the house. Okay? And so you blame the gun?
I'm not blaming the gun.
Right, you can't blame the gun.
I'm blaming
Right.
the politicians that have the power to effectuate
Jeff is
change.
saying, whoever, how did he get that gun? Am I correct on that statement right there?
I'm saying that access matters.
Right. So he's saying, how did he get that gun? So to Aissa's point, why did he feel that he needed that gun in his home?
Yeah, I mean,
Bad neighborhood, bad environment. Was he in something he shouldn't have been
But
in?
it doesn't justify killing people. You don't.
nor does it justify him not. I hear so much about the responsible gun owner. Oh, I'm a responsible gun owner.
yeah.
Yeah, where was the gun safe? Where was the gun lock?
Right.
They give them out for free in the sheriff's office. So, having the gun, while we have to address in a governmental concern,
Yeah.
from the government, we've got to address why it is that person feels like they need a gun. But just because someone can have a gun, or because they feel the need to have it, doesn't give them a blank check to keep that in the hands, or what could be in the hands of children,
Yeah.
or not stored properly, or
Right.
not handled properly. I mean, again,
And we've
I chafe just because I hear so much about the law-abiding gun owner, but there's never really any conversation about what happens when that law-abiding gun owner violates laws,
right.
or when they're not responsible with their weaponry.
Well, let me just say this, and Aisha, you can attest to this. I think when I was in Harrisburg, we introduced 4 specific legislations
right.
on properly securing your gun.
Yeah.
Sure.
And I think you were in one of the meetings in the Safe Caucus where Madam Ledeen at the time was the one who was the director of the Safe Caucus. None of those had nothing to do with your Second Amendment right. It basically just talked about how
Safe
to
storage,
keep
right.
safe storage, and none of that was taken up in Harrisburg. The Republican legislature, they just don't want to entertain that, and that's a problem.
Well,
that
and
becomes
it doesn't even have to be punitive. You know?
Exactly.
So why not, entertain a conversation about tax credits for safes? Why not, making them tax exempt? I mean, we could do that sort of thing, but again, the legislature is not interested in having that conversation. They want to jail their way out of this issue. We know that's not going to work. And when it comes to talking about guns at all, they just throw their hands up in the air and say, well, it's a Philadelphia problem. And we know what that's coded language for.
Exactly right. We have to take a short break. We'll be right back to continue this conversation. You're listening to Voices of Change on USALA Radio with your hosts, Leslie Acosta and Aissia Richardson.
To resist? What does it mean to fight so that no one gets left behind? To stand up against bigotry and corruption? It can't just be a tweet or a soundbite. It has to be in our actions. I'm Jeff Dempsey. For the last 10 years, I worked in Harrisburg to provide services to those in need, to pass sensible gun laws that take guns away from domestic abusers, and to teach folks across our Commonwealth about advocacy and activism. I've built my family here, and I look forward to our future. But when our elected officials claim progressive values and vote against them, when they endanger those targeted by the Trump administration, and when they sidestep the voters and subvert the democratic process, what then does it mean to resist? It means demanding better representation.
And we can start in our own backyards. I'm running for state representative to pass better gun laws, to do something about our environment, to fix our schools, and to fight against the Republican assault on reproductive health, but most of all, to put into action the values that we share.
Welcome back. You are listening to Voices of Change on USALA Radio with your hosts, Leslie Acosta and Aissia Richardson. We have a special guest today talking about gun violence in the city of Philadelphia and across this nation. His name is Jeff Dempsey. He's also running for state representative in the 175th district. Jeff, we're having this good conversation, much needed conversation about gun violence in this city. A lot going on here in the city of Philadelphia, a lot of stalemate in Harrisburg, a lot of locally here issues going on, and hopefully, with the priorities that you have in place, with the experience that you have, you can take this conversation to Harrisburg. I'm not saying that you're going to change, because obviously that's going to be a tall task for you to accomplish, but at least to address and start having these conversations on how we can address educational concerns that we have here in the city of Philadelphia. As you know, there's this huge issue here when it comes to the asbestos of the buildings here in the city of Philadelphia. They have to clean that out. They need the funding to do that. Harrisburg has to release some funding. Governor Wolf has requested for the funding to be released. That's still, it's not currently happening, but there's conversations about that. Let's talk about the environment. These are some of your priorities. The environment, how do we have more, the Green New Deal for Pennsylvania, and how do we invest in that, in renewable energies? You talk about that as your priority. The opioid crisis is another issue in the city of Philadelphia, a big one. How do we pursue more evidence-based initiatives to address this real concern that we have on the opioid crisis? The LGBTQ rights here also in the city of Philadelphia. How do we protect our brothers and sisters here in the city of Philadelphia, protect their concerns, their issues, their rights, regardless of who you choose to love, right? So you're coming in with a laundry list of priorities to take to Harrisburg. Which ones do you feel you need to attack? You need to tackle first? Which of those priorities are you going to tackle first?
Sure. Well, I'm really glad to be on this program, and prior to the coming back on air, we had sort of made this joke that there's a lot that we may not agree on.
Right.
However, there are some things that I'm sure that we can. Now,
That's right.
it may not come readily at first.
Correct.
But I think if we really put our heads together and we really looked at this thing critically, we can get there. And, when I was at Ceasefire PA, I had the opportunity to work on a piece of legislation that looked specifically and very narrowly at domestic abuse. How, we had this problem where intimate partners being, killed with guns. How does that happen? And when guns are in the home, even if they're not used in an instance of domestic violence, the likelihood of lethality
Triggers.
goes up 5 times. So we were able to really address what are some of the flaws, what are some of the areas that we might be able to fix this. We passed a piece of legislation that did a couple things to essentially take guns out of the hands of domestic abusers. So, in the business of politics, we can often malign the other side of the aisle, the other side of the debate. We can paint them like, the boogeymen. But the reality is that there are chances and opportunities to come along to try to do meaningful change.
But Jeff, let me ask you this question, because this is you're in the 175th.
That's right.
And those folks up there carry guns. Those folks in that area, that demographic of that area carry guns. If you're going from Frankfurt to the Northeast,
well,
where
I'm
most
not
police
in the
officers are at,
Northeast. I'm south.
a little down.
So
south?
I have like Fishtown, Northern Liberties,
right.
Old City, Society Hill.
So here, because I've seen 2 incidents where police officers had domestic issues in their home, right? To the point where there was restraining orders, right? And so if there's a restraining order where he can't come into the house and then she files for that restraining order and there's a domestic situation, does the officer then, based on what you're talking about, is he not allowed to use his gun, and gun is part of the uniform that he puts on? Do we restrict him? Or do we put him in office duty? Like, give me some scenarios of what we do if there's a disagreement between husband and wife.
Yeah, I mean, so I think you...
And he's a police
So
officer.
what I would let me just address this kind of quickly. With the law that we're talking about, specifically Act 79, these are people who have been found by a judge and then, have gone through due process and been convicted of domestic violence. So this isn't just she says I did something and I'm saying that I didn't do it. We're past that. And what we're talking about are the removals of firearms from the home within a quick time frame and for people who have been convicted of a crime. So, I mean, I think it's important to make that distinction that, Act 79 comes into play when people have gone through that process. And there's still remedies in place in that legislation so that if people require a firearm for work, let's say if they work in law enforcement, they may still have access to that at certain times. Moreover, there's a way to enter into what's called a consent agreement.
Okay.
So that if certain stipulations are met between the 2 parties, that they can still retain their firearm.
Good.
So there's ways to address these issues, and I think we can find them.
Well, the consent, see, what I like about that is people got together.
Right.
Republicans and Democrats, they got together on Act 79, and they came up with some solutions that satisfied both sides of the aisle on this issue, right?
But go ahead.
And I would need, because once again, when you have this discretionary or discretion in flexibility in the law, it depends on who is sitting at the table, because Jeff can get slammed and I can be politically active and not get slammed. And so it needs to be, and I think Curtis Jones city council had passed something called red flag or
They
something.
attempted to do something like that, yeah.
Right. And so what that means that if you get a phone call that someone is doing something and come to find out that they might be off medication or whatever it may be, immediately the first question they say is, well, do you possess any firearms? And then the firearms taken away from them. And so I think that it feels good to hear Jeff even deal with there may be a common ground so we can look at each case individually opposed to board stroking everyone.
Sure.
Yeah.
So that's
well,
cool.
and to get to the original question, I think it's something that you said, it's about making sure that everyone's at the table.
At the table.
Right?
Yeah.
So when we talk about a Green New Deal, what I found really inspiring about the New York State Legislature, the way that they tackled their environmental policy, which sort of mirrors aspects of the Green New Deal, was the first thing they did was create the table and bring people into it. And not just environmental folks, but they brought environmental folks. They brought people from organized labor. They brought people from environmental justice groups, organizations that focus just on the disparity of impact that climate change has on certain neighborhoods. They also brought in social justice groups, people who really spend time looking at the ramifications of racist housing policies or education policies. So again, making sure that people are at the table. I mean, that's something that I'm committed to in our investigation of good policy.
Yeah.
I'm running for office because at the end of the day, my background, whether it's in the gun violence prevention arena, whether it's servicing constituents in the northeast part of the city, what I've seen is that policy matters.
Yeah.
When bad decisions are made, it affects people's lives.
It does.
And that in Harrisburg, we really talk about these things in the abstract. What's a little, if we shave a little money off of SNAP benefits, what does it matter? But it does. There's someone who used to receive, X amount per month, and now they're receiving less.
Right.
And their children aren't less hungry.
Right.
So, policy has an effect. It matters. And therefore, I think we have to have a commitment to doing the best of it. I'm running again. I'm challenging an incumbent,
Yeah.
which can always be a prickly affair.
Yeah.
But, I'm challenging the incumbent because of a vote that they made to expand the E-Verify program
Yeah, that's another.
to the building, to the construction industry.
Yeah.
And I was asked by a reporter, do you think that this person who's only been in office one term, is that enough time to judge them? And my answer is absolutely, because the policies that they
Well, that's a pattern,
voted
right?
on,
That speaks to that person, the way that person thinks
right,
and votes.
and those policies, they are going to have an effect on people's lives.
Absolutely.
And if you feel like I do that the E-Verify program is at best flawed, and at worst is an opportunity for the Trump administration to call and target undocumented citizens, then, yeah, absolutely. One term is enough to make that judgment. Like you said, I think it goes to the thought process that they use
That's it.
to make political decisions. And again, it's because I deeply believe that policy matters.
When you say racist housing, give me your description when you say racist housing practice.
Sure. I mean, we know historically that redlining had created a system that kept, specifically, African Americans, black people in neighborhoods. And then moreover, that system at no point in time was particularly fair, right? So, I mean, we know that oftentimes, African American homeowners had to deal with, not only being dictated what neighborhoods they could live in, but had an uneven, shifting goal lines as to even interest rates or how much they had to pay, or very draconian, if you miss a payment, you lose your home completely, right? So we know that those practices were in place for a long time, and we know that the consequences of that ripple out through time.
But I think that you grab hold of something from the past and you try to relegate it to the 21st century. I think you're
the past doesn't stop.
No. Let
It's
me make the point. The point is that when you look at tax credits, when you look at developers going after tax credit, you still have to have a base of people in which to relocate and move around. And so you're not really trying to help the poor. You're not really trying to help the working poor or the poor, because with these tax credits that come into the city by developers, all you're doing is relocating, and you have to have a waiting list when you get tax credits of poor and indigent people in order to have a system so we can keep moving these people around. So when you provide opportunities for them, when you provide quality jobs for them, when you provide an opportunity so they can say, okay, you know what, I want to move my family, the second decade or second generation of my family living here in public housing, I want to move them somewhere else. I want to move them to King of Prussia. I want to move them to Upper Dublin. I want to move them to Norristown. You still have those opportunities to do that. The question is, why do we have a system that has to have or is not benefiting the poor, but is benefiting the developers? Because I've not heard politicians, not you, but other politicians say, hey, you know what? We're going to relocate these people and we're going to give them the opportunity for first-time home ownership, right? Or we're going to find the resources for them so we can take some of these dilapidated houses and through, what's that organization that fix up houses? Habitat for Humanity, and fix up houses. So I'm going to take 10 people out of this development right here because I'm going to relocate it, but I'm going to put them in 10 Habitat for Humanity houses so they'll be homeowners and stuff like that. Those are the innovative programs that I'm looking for. I'm not looking for the same rhetoric that we've been getting for over a period of time. And once again, since you're running for the 175th and there's an incumbent there, Leslie brought you here, and I've got a chance to meet you, and I like to take you some places so other folks can meet you and see you, and that would help you and the exposure of you, because I think you're on point in some areas, and I think you're willing to agree to disagree and come to the table. That's all you can ask out of a politician.
Well,
Sure.
that-
Well,
that's
and
important.
I think we just have to have a commitment. Thank you for saying that. And I think we have to have a commitment to good work. You know, there are many things that are wrong, I think, with the current presidential administration.
Yeah.
Probably not enough for me to go over in the time that we have.
And we'll come back and have this conversation.
But what I would say
How
is
did we
this.
get that far?
Well, what I would say is this: is I think what we've seen, in my opinion, is a loss of the concept of public service. And I don't believe that the president makes decisions based off of government, public
Absolutely
service,
not.
leadership. I think it's very much about a personal advancement and how does one succeed. And I'm deeply troubled when I see my state legislature, my state representative, make decisions not based off of the public good,
Yeah.
but based off of what's best for them.
Yeah.
They did it when they voted for the E-Verify bill because their single biggest campaign contributor wanted it. And they did it when they circumvented the electorate to obtain office.
Yeah.
That's troubling to me. And as someone who deeply believes in the value of policy and government work, not only do we need to uphold the principles of governance by consent of the governed, but we also have to keep that in mind that it has to be about public service. And that's why I'm running.
And you know, let me say this, Jeff. I mean, and this is a problem across the board, where we've lost the idea and the concept of really serving people. When you get elected into office, you get elected into office not to serve yourself, to serve the people. And when you take up votes, because you go to caucus,
Right.
and you sit there and it's like a murder board on these legislations, and that they're going to come up for a vote. When you are voting on your interests and interests only, and not on the interests of the people that elected you into office, that's a problem. To me, that says you don't deserve to be in that office, because you're not representing the people. You're representing the people that are putting money in your pocket to keep you in office. And that becomes a huge problem.
Because you begin to exploit certain people.
Well,
you begin to leave certain people by the
But you
wayside.
can't forget who has given you the power. People give you the power to
right.
serve them.
But when you
don't serve
exploit-
yourself, you serve the people.
If you say that there's over 400,000 African Americans in the city, and you're still telling me about poor schools, dilapidated schools, you're still, right now the person who head up the school district has sent these children on class trips for the last couple of days because the asbestos was not remediated like he said it would be at a point in time. And I think, and I can agree with Jeff, best practices means that you tell me when I'm going to get this done, and it's going to get done by that time. And so the exploitation of your poor or your African American in this city is
But we've
prevalent.
allowed it, Melvin.
Go ahead.
The voters have the power to stand up and say no more, and
Yeah.
hold their politician
I agree.
accountable.
I agree with that.
If your politician is selling you out,
I
listen,
agree.
hold that politician accountable.
I
And
agree.
the only power that you have is that
Is
vote.
your vote.
Is to say no. I'm not going to allow this to happen anymore. No, if you did this against my interest and I'm the one that put you into office, then I got to get you out. And so that also comes to this issue of educating the voters on making an informed vote when they vote for their elected politicians.
Well, when I was at Ceasefire PA, I had the opportunity to go all over the Commonwealth and talk to people about just understanding the legislature, understanding their website, tracking bills on their own.
Exactly.
And, was that about gun violence prevention policies? No. But we really believed that if we had a smarter advocacy
Exactly.
throughout the Commonwealth, then sooner or later they may be, they may come to our side on these issues. But I think that that's so important. Just like you had said, we want to hold our elected officials accountable. Sometimes it's challenging in our daily lives to do it.
Yeah.
And it's also hard to put through the noise. Someone can look progressive because of a tweet. They can look progressive because of their fancy Insta photo.
But vote conservatively.
Right. And that's a little harder to parse out. It's a little more challenging to find. And let's face it, we're all very busy. We have a million things going on in our lives. And it's hard to sort of go into the cracks and crevices of the state government website, pull up vote totals and whatnot.
Yeah.
But nevertheless,
But
we have to have that conversation.
Right.
Yeah.
And it's even harder for African Americans who, through a democratic system, have placed people in office for decades. I'm running for Congress in the 3rd Congressional District, and the guy, he's been in state office 28 years. 28 years. He's been in state office, state rep, and then this is his first term as a congressman. You know, legacy is already in place. You know, but Martin Luther King would says longevity has its place. You know, and so nuances like the ideas you're bringing and the change that Philadelphia needs, it needs new representation. It needs people to be in, new people to come in with innovative ideas, but they have to stop exploiting what we've been exploiting for years in the city of Philadelphia. And that billions of dollars have been spent on our school system already. Billions of dollars, whether it's the teachers union or whether it's fixing or repairing these schools. But there's been one common denominator. 88% of the school district has African American participation in there, and have always had that many African Americans in those schools. Those schools you shut down, those schools you close out, those schools you redevelop, those schools that has asbestos in there, you know. And so I think that we need to empower everybody so everybody has a fair say and a fair stake in the game. And that's what we need to do, and I hope that's what you're willing to do, because UCLA is a great venue, and without this venue, you know, we would be trying to find you somewhere else, so we may never know who you are.
Sure.
Right. Well, we have to take a short break. You're listening to Voices of Change on UCLA Radio with your host, Leslie Acosta and Aissia Richardson, and our special guest, Jeff Dempsey, who is running for state representative in the 100th and 75th Legislative District. We'll be right back.
Hello, my name is Melvin Prince Johnakin, and I'm running for the 3rd Congressional District, City of Philadelphia, in the great state of Pennsylvania. We're 16 days in January. There's more than 22 killings in our city. You need a community congressman that will go block by block, door by door, and fix this problem. Now, I think it's economics, but you might think it's something else. And I'm coming so you can tell me what it is. Once again, my name is Melvin Prince Johnakin. I'm running for the 3rd Congressional District. Thank you.
If you're even considering getting your high school diploma, go get it. You can do it.
Find free adult education classes near you at finishyourdiploma.org.
Welcome back. You're listening to Voices of Change on UCLA Radio with your hosts, Aissia Richardson and Leslie Acosta. We have a special guest today, Jeff Dempsey. He's running for the 100th and 75th Legislative District. Jeff, it's a pleasure to have you here. You are a wealth of knowledge. You know your stuff. You know, I've met you previously in terms of the policy. I'm hopeful. Hopeful because you are very well versed on policy. You understand policy very well, and that's important to have someone that can be a voice for us in Harrisburg, coming from that position of strength and experience. What say you, if elected, how would you coalesce both sides of the aisle to get some of these initiatives that you are proposing and some of these priorities? How would you bring this forth, and how would you what would you do if you get elected to introduce some of these important pieces of legislation in regards to the gun violence, in regards to education, environment, the opioid crisis, and even in regards to the LGBTQ rights? What would you do to coalesce people together to bring legislation to have an impact? Because he mentioned something before the break, and this is a fact. The only state rep that really introduced legislation, that passed legislation signed by the governor, even by a Democratic governor, was John Taylor. who since was elected in 1984, had a huge impact. But he was able to work on both sides of the aisle to get stuff
And John
done.
Purcell.
And John Purcell was another guy. But that's another.
Well, my first campaign was my first campaign I ran.
Got it done.
My first campaign was unseating John Purcell. That's the first race I ever ran. So I don't think he's a fan of mine.
Jeff.
Well, he did steal $10 million from the taxpayers. But nevertheless, what I would say is, we have to work together across the aisle when we can.
Yes.
And look, there are certain things that I will never waver on. I will never waver on a woman's right to choose. I will absolutely never waver on equitable and fair rights for members and our brothers and sisters in the LGBTQ community.
Right.
Never. That is a hard line and a red line for me. I'll never go back on those. But look, when we talk about some of these huge issues, raising the minimum wage, gun violence prevention, the environment, these things that affect all of us throughout the Commonwealth, there can be avenues for common ground, and we have to explore them. There are some legislators who sit on the Judiciary Committee who, I've certainly rolled my eyes at more than a few times.
Right.
But they also have been some of the same legislators that have made some salient points. And we've got to address that. So, when we talk about guns, okay, let's talk about expanding background checks, but let's also make sure that if the state level system is going down repeatedly, that there's a way to fix that.
Right.
Let's talk about the fact that if we can share all of our Pennsylvania instant check records completely, wholly, and accurately with the national instant check system, once we can really be convinced of that, then maybe it is redundant, and we can consider looking into whether or not it's repetitive,
well,
right? But I think that there's ways to do that. There's conversations that can be had. We have to do it. But I do think at first it starts with electing leaders who have that commitment to public policy. I like to think that I'm one of them, and I certainly hope that I have the honor of gaining the votes of the members of my neighbors in the 175th. I hope that they recognize my commitment to good work and good policy, and I hope that they vote for me in the April primary on April 28th.
Well, we're going to bring you back. We only have a minute left to conclude this segment or this episode. And definitely, Jeff, we will bring you back right before the election or after the petitions to see and follow up on your campaign and how things are going. And Prince, you have anything else to say before we conclude?
When
we have a minute left.
Right. Well, this is Prince Johnakin running for the 3rd Congressional District. So you guys get out and vote April 28th. But when we make the statement that there's some things that we will not waver on, and so the killing of African-American males in the city of Philadelphia, unarmed African-American males, or any shooting by a police officer with an unarmed man in the city of Philadelphia should be one of those hard lines that we can't waver on. I think that's just very important because this year there's a bunch of shootings. Thank God none by any police officer at this time. But once again, we still have to cut down the death rate inside of this city right here.
Absolutely.
And
that is a
police
must.
Violence is gun violence.
And it's a problem. It's a problem, and hopefully, we can come to some consensus and real solutions to this problem. But everyone has to be at the table in order for us to address this public health crisis that we're having in Philadelphia and across this nation. Thank you, both of you, for being here today. Jeff, we will bring you back. You are listening to Voices of Change on Usala Radio. We'll see you next Saturday. Thank you.